The Oklahoma City Thunder have officially secured the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, capping off a 57-win season. But what does their path forward look like as we head into the playoffs? This video is brought to you by Squarespace, but a little bit more about them later. Oklahoma City securing the number 1 seed is impressive in its own right, especially in such a difficult Western Conference. But in my opinion, what's far more impressive than that is the fact that they finished top 5 in offensive and defensive rating, as well as finishing top 5 in both half-court offensive and defensive rating. But why is finishing top 5 in both offense and defense important in the first place? Of the last 20 teams to win an NBA championship, 16 of them finished top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency during the regular season. Meeting that mark is typically a pretty good indicator that a team is truly capable of making a deep playoff run at the bare minimum, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that they should be the favorites to win it all. But given how the standings ended up shaking out, how are they looking against the teams that they're likely to run into in round 1? They'll play the winner of the second play-in game, so it's possible that they run into either the Pelicans, Lakers, Kings, or Warriors, depending on who wins and loses which play-in games. Taking a glance at how the season series against these possible teams went this season, the limited sample sizes that we have definitely lends credence to the idea that the Pelicans and Warriors would probably be the preferred matchup for OKC in the postseason, but of course there's all sorts of context that you have to take into account when looking at regular season matchups between two teams that are potentially meeting in the playoffs. Just because OKC had a good series against these teams in the regular season doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a good series against them in the playoffs. And the same goes for teams that OKC had a bad regular season series against. What's probably a better piece of information to look at is simply just looking at how OKC fared against good teams in general this year. As in, how did they do against teams that ranked top 10 in point differential? This is actually an area where OKC did better than every team in the NBA this year. They're 19-8 against top 10 teams this season with a plus 4.6 net rating. Being able to play well against great teams seems like such an obvious benchmark for a truly great team to meet. But for them to be as good as they are against great teams means that it's highly unlikely that any team should go into a series against OKC expecting a cakewalk against a young, inexperienced team. They might lack a robust playoff resume, but they're nothing to sneeze at. Even against strong rotating defenses, the amount of guys that they can have on the floor to attack off the catch at any given time means that a defense doesn't just have to be good most of the time, they have to be good all the time. And if you lose any one guy for even a second, they're gonna make you pay. The amount of ghost screens that they run puts defenses in really awkward positions where you may have one guy behind the ball in the drop big trying to contain a drive, and a corner defender is rotating onto the screener that popped out to the perimeter. But that's where OKC will make a ton of their money, on the feeds to baseline cutters that constantly punish late and non-existent help. The constant threat of drives means a defense can find themselves in situations where multiple defenders will be digging at a driver and a rim protector is forced to commit to help, and the versatility of a guy like Chet Holmgren makes him a lob threat and a shooting threat that you have to be aware of at all times. While Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can create his own offense at will and score on his own, it's the fact that defenses will settle to get the ball out of his hands early. But having a player like Chet in the short role who can make quick decisions, as well as adding an extra baseline cutter, can challenge disciplined defenses that aren't prepared to react in time to stop the advantage. Real quick, guys, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website building platform for creators to set themselves apart from the crowd online. Whether you're trying to share your work with more people or grow a brand, Squarespace makes it super simple to build an awesome website where you can engage with your audience and reach more people. I have absolutely zero web design experience, but Squarespace's super simple user interface cuts out all of the frustrating parts of building a website and turns it into a fun and simple simple process. You can make a completely personalized website with their guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. You can choose from professionally curated layout and styling options to build a unique website from the ground up. And they make it super easy to manage your search engine optimization so that you can find your audience and they can find you. Make checkout effortless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools. You can accept credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and even in eligible countries, you can offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay or ClearPay. If you've always wanted to build a website but you just don't know where to start, then Squarespace should be your first step. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AlexHoops to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to it. What's really exciting about OKC in a postseason setting, though, isn't just the fact that this is simply a good basketball team. It's the fact that this team has consistently risen to the occasion in big moments throughout the season. According to PBPstats.com, they've been the fourth best team in the league during high and very high leverage minutes this season, which are defined as possessions in a game that have a high impact on win probability. You can read more about leverage and how it's tracked and analyzed using the link in the description, and it's actually super interesting, so go check it out after this video. There are obviously two main culprits this year when it comes to coming up big in big moments for the Thunder, those two culprits being Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. OKC's offensive execution is great, and the fact that they can operate in so many different ways is something that's definitely going to help them get into those moments where the stakes are highest, and in those moments is where they're going to have to put the ball in the hands of their best players and just rely on them to get a bucket. And we know that Shai and J-Dub are capable of doing that. Shai and J-Dub in the clutch this year are shooting a combined 62% from the field, and that includes 46% shooting from three. When your best players can light it up like that when it matters most, it definitely makes you feel good about what they might be able to do when there's 20 seconds left down by one in an elimination game. But it's a disservice to the rest of the roster to only talk about how those two guys perform in big moments, because OKC as a whole has been one of the best clutch time teams in the league. They have the fifth best win percentage in games that come down to clutch time. The playoffs are obviously an entirely different animal, so just because OKC is doing well when the lights are brightest in the regular season doesn't inherently mean they'll do well when the lights are brightest in the playoffs. But the reality is that this is a young team playing like a team that's been together for years and has years of experience. One point of emphasis that I've been paying attention to this year is SGA's three-point efficiency and volume. Shai is one of the most gifted scorers in the league and an absolute monster in the mid-range and anytime he's able to get a paint touch. But that low three-point volume and below average efficiency is something that teams are likely going to look to exploit in the playoffs. The problem that I theoretically see arising with that is just because you get the ball out of Shai's hands because his three ball isn't falling, you still have other threats to worry about. With Jalen Williams being as good as he's been, he's able to create an advantage on his own regardless of how defenses are playing Shai. And having Shai operate off the ball just means that you allow him to potentially get ahead of steam going downhill off the catch. Shai's limited perimeter shooting doesn't take away from the fact that a defense is still going to have a hard time containing him on drives, and the decisiveness of the supporting cast around him just means that you might end up in situations where you have two on the ball when you don't necessarily want to have two on the ball. The lower three-point volume and efficiency in the regular season isn't ideal, and it might be a hiccup that causes some issues when defenses try to take advantage of it. But I don't necessarily think it's something that's overly exploitable to the point that it would be the direct reason as to why OKC does or doesn't win a series. Defensively is where I'm most interested to see OKC have to adjust on the fly. Obviously, Chet is a fantastic defender, and OKC as a whole has extremely strong defensive talent and infrastructure up and down the roster, but they don't always have the most size in the world on the floor at all times. Something the Thunder excel at is turnover generation. So what they lack in sheer size and physicality, they can make up for with their work in the passing lanes, disciplined help defense, and of course the fact that they can completely turn off the water for opposing teams at times when they switch in and out of zone defenses and throw off offenses for multiple possessions straight. This is an area where having Mark Daigneault as the head coach is going to help OKC a lot, because I think he implements and knows when to pull out those defenses really, really well. People talk about OKC's rebounding a lot, which is fair because it is an important aspect for any team. But theoretically, the Thunder operate in a way to where they might lose the rebounding battle, but ideally, they've hammered other important areas where they're strong so much more that it outweighs the damage that they might have experienced as a result of not getting as many rebounds. It may not always work, but coaches and teams are oftentimes going to stick to their philosophies because they trust that over the course of an entire series, it's going to work out. OKC is one of the most impressive young teams we've seen in a long time, but when you lack extensive playoff experience, people are going to have questions about you, and that's fair. But at the same time, this OKC team is far from your average young team, and even though anything can happen in the playoffs, it's hard for me to imagine any team is in for an easy series if they have to run into the Thunder. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. That's the easiest way to support me and help me continue making content. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.